This is Yao Ming. It's an amazing name. But this is also Yao Ming. It's a pretty good name. And this is also Yao Ming. But this is a terrible name. Why though? See, Chinese names don't work the same way as English names. In English, you might just pick a name based on how it feels. Like, I feel like he's a Josh. But in Chinese culture, picking the right characters for names is so important that parents often go to fortune tellers to choose the right one. Because as we see with Yao Ming, one wrong character in his name took him from NBA legend to beggar on the streets. One wrong character and you've given your kid a boy name instead of a girl name. One wrong character and you've gone from calling your kid a hero to a wimp. So to help you make sure that you don't pick a bad Chinese name and save you the trip to the fortune teller, my team and I analyzed over 10,000 different Chinese names and broke down the science behind what exactly makes a Chinese name good, but also what makes it bad. My girlfriend and I are talking about names for our kids in the future, so I'm really glad we did this video because the findings are gonna shock you. Because it all starts with this. Specifically, this. Childbirth. Okay, right at birth, you want to note the date and the time the baby is born, okay? Don't miss these, and I'll tell you why we need them by the end. But they'll be useful for making sure you don't give your child a name that'll make them get bullied for the rest of their life. Don't worry, you won't get bullied. Yo, it's really, really creepy. So now, before we get into how to name them, we have to first understand, how do Chinese names even work? Okay, I'm gonna put this away, it's a little creepy. Anyway, so if we strip down to the basics, a Chinese name works like an English name, but in reverse. By the way, I left that baby right there because we'll need him in a bit. Like, we gotta name him. So, yo, he's so creepy. Why do they make these things? So yeah, it works like an English name, but in reverse. Let's take, for example, Jackie Chan. His first name is Gong Sang, and his last name is Chan. So would his name be Gong Sang Chan? No. See, in Chinese, the surname always comes first, so technically he's Chan Jackie. And I'll tell you why that's super important to know when naming your kid in a second. But the reason why Chinese works like this is because Chinese culture really values what's called, family and heritage, right? Honor to your family. And so by putting the surname first, it serves as a reminder that the family comes before the individual. So now going back to it, the reason why this is so important is because looking at names from the wrong perspective can have very serious consequences. And specifically, that happened to me. See, when I was born, my name actually wasn't going to be Sheldon. It was actually going to be Sherman. In my mom's head, English names worked like Chinese names. So Ho Sherman, a fine name. But thank goodness someone told my mom that English names worked in reverse, because if she didn't change it, on top of having the last name Ho, which people will 100% bully you for, I would have had the name Sherman Ho. And so that's why it's super important to remember, we have to think of the whole name as a unit, with the last name coming first in Chinese. If the first name is good, but the collective name with the last name is bad, then you're setting up your kid to be bullied. Okay? So, now that we understand that the surname always goes first in Chinese, all that's left is to decide on the first name. Easy, right? Put the surname first, like Ho. Now pick some random Chinese characters as the first name that sounds like, I don't know, say Dylan, so Dylan, and done. Of course, it's not that easy, because the next step is we have to figure out what traits we want this child to have. Because unlike English names, Chinese names all have meaning. See, in English, pick a name, like I said, based off how it feels, right? Like this baby over here. See, in English, pick a name based off how it sounds, right? Like maybe this baby looks like an Allison. This one looks like a Jake. This one looks like Sheldon's a cool name. Said no one ever. Okay, I'm well aware my name doesn't like exude like sexy. But we see English naming is very feeling based, right? If we like the name for Jake for this one, or like honestly Jigsaw from Saw, because it looks like the baby from Saw, then we'll just name the baby that, right? But in Chinese, it's completely different. We always start with the meaning. So for this newborn child, we have to think about what kind of kid do we want this to be? Happy, smart, prideful, courageous.
The spawn of Satan.
And so typically first names are either one or two characters, which means there's room for one or two traits. So in the case of Yao Ming, for example, his first name is Ming, or Ming in Mandarin, which just means like bright and clear, right? In my name, I have two, right? Gawing or Jiarong, which means Jia. Okay, this character means like good, excellent, praise, really good stuff. It's a very common name for kind of like positivity. Okay, it means like to praise, to commend. And then Wing or Rong in Mandarin, this character means like glory, honor, prosperity, distinction, and so you could interpret my name as good and prosperous, praise and honor, excellent and flourishing. Thanks, Mom. But unfortunately, I've been told that my name is like the Jake of Chinese names, meaning it's like super basic. And I'll tell you how to avoid having a basic name like Jake in a bit. But first, let's say for simplicity's sake, we want our kid to be smart and noble. Cool, traits selected. Now you can move on to the next step. Okay, so do I just look at the dictionary now for those words like smart and noble and I'm done? Somewhat. I'll show you which words to use in a second, but first, before you do that, you need to be aware of the things to avoid, of which there are 3. Because like we saw earlier, the wrong character, like Yao Ming and Yao Ming, well, one brings him from NBA legend to beggar on the streets. And that's because that character, Ming, means dark and depressed, which sounds like a good name for this baby over here. So the first thing to avoid is words that straight up don't mean good things. And this is obvious. Like, we're not thinking of the word like dark and depressed when naming our kid, except for Jigsaw over here, I hope. But on top of that, we want to avoid words that sound like negative things, even if the character for it isn't negative. For instance, the character Bing means remarkable and splendid in Mandarin, but it sounds like Bing, which means sick in Mandarin. So a lot of Chinese people would definitely avoid that. And so this is why you can't just go into a dictionary and grab random words. And similar to the man-ho problem my parents ran into, if you have a two-character first name, you also want to avoid combinations of words that sound like a negative word as well. An example of this would be like bai chi. You see, bai means clear and chi means prudent and like, stern, which, maybe we want our kid to be that, right? But actually it sounds like bai chi, which means idiot in Mandarin. And so we want to avoid that. But actually in Cantonese, those characters are bak tek, which actually doesn't sound like idiot at all in Cantonese, which brings me to the last thing we want to be careful of, which is we want to be careful because the last thing we want to avoid is words that sound weird in other dialects, okay? Either sounding weird in Mandarin, either sounding weird in Cantonese. And don't worry, I'll give you a lot of great words to choose from once you get into how to pick a good name. But seriously, we're really trying to avoid our kid being bullied all across China, and certain words will be weird in other dialects. For example, the word for drink in Mandarin is yin liao. And in Cantonese, instead of using yin liao, we use yin pin or yang ban. Do you know why we don't use yin liao in Mandarin, even though it technically has the same meaning in Cantonese? Well, the reason why is because yang liu sounds like drink pee. So you don't want to order a drink and actually say, I want to drink pee, right? And so same thing for names, right? And so you want to avoid names that will sound okay in one language but sound wrong in the other. And so you have to be really careful around this, especially with Cantonese and Mandarin, okay? So anyway, now that we know what not to do and how Chinese names work, let's get into the fun part, how to pick a good Chinese name. So you got your kid's birth date and time, recorded it? Good, because we'll need that soon. So first off, there's a difference between boy names and girl names. I know it's not the old times anymore, we're progressive and stuff now, but Chinese society will look at a boy weird if he has the character beautiful in his name, okay? And we don't want to set our kids up to be bullied. So with that being said though, most characters are gender neutral, and look at it the same way you do adjectives in English, right? People don't typically associate boys with beautiful, so that one's probably more for women. And people don't associate girls with handsome, so that one is probably more for the men. Okay, remember, irresponsibly naming your kid is actually abuse by a parent, okay? If you name your kid something that's supposed to be bullied for life, you are an evil parent, okay? I will say that right now, okay? I'll give you an example, right? My last name is Ho, okay? My girlfriend's Sandy, and then she was like, I'm not taking your last name. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I'm okay with that, because then she comes Sandy Ho. And then she was like, oh, I really want to name our kid Summer, but then our kid becomes Summer Ho, right? So I'm like, yeah, we can't name our kid Summer, right? And so you gotta have foresight into this. It's really important, okay? Summer Ho is getting bullied for her entire childhood. I'm telling you right now. Okay, so anyway, let's look at these characters now for common names for kind of Chinese people, okay? Then after, I'll give some tips on how to make sure you pick a good Chinese name because there's a lot of options, okay? So the following are some common characters for boys' names, okay? So hero, Hong or Xiong in Mandarin. Inspire, Kai or Qi in Mandarin. Intelligence, Yue or Rui in Mandarin. Handsome, Zhen or Jun in Mandarin. Kindness, Yan or Ren in Mandarin. Virtuous, Da or De in Mandarin. Huge, Wang or Hong in Mandarin. Health, Gin or Jian in Mandarin. Prosperity, Cheng or Chang in Mandarin. Magnificent in Cantonese, Hua, or in Mandarin, Hua. Forever, Wing, Yong in Mandarin. Humble, Him, Qian in Mandarin. So for men, the most common words include strong, Keng, nation, Guo, as well as great, which means Guai or Wei, as well as outstanding, which means Gi or Jie in Mandarin. Then there's some for girls, okay? Blessing or grace, which means Yan or En, jade, Lam, Lin, intelligence, Wei, Hui. So you see there's a girl intelligence and a guy intelligence. You see what I mean? There's different ones. Then there's beautiful, Mei or Mei in Mandarin. Morning, Hu, Xiao in Mandarin. Outstanding, Wing, Ying. Peaceful, Ning in Mandarin. Ning. Heart, Sam, Jin. Poem, Si, Shi. Sunny day, Ceng, Qing. Happy, Ying, Ying. Child, Tong, Tong. And those are some of the most common ones for women. So like we said, there's no limit in choosing the variety. It's like Lego, right? As long as the name isn't violating anything we mentioned above, it's pretty fair game. Okay, so now it's a lot and you're probably thinking, wait, hold on a second. Does that mean that everyone is pretty much called the same thing? Like I said, we'll get into how to make sure you don't give your kid a basic name like Jake, kind of like mine, basically, in a bit, but it's common in Chinese, right? Like just like all, the Koreans or Kims, it's common you'll find someone with at least one of the same characters as your name, but not every character. For example, like I'm Ho Ga Wing or He Jiarong, and Jackson Wang is Wang Gayi or Wang Jiaer. We both had that same ga in the middle. And I'll bet $100 that his siblings, if he has any, are also Wang Ga or Wang Jia something. And how do I know that? Well, it's because of the two final pieces of the puzzle of how to pick a good Chinese name for this guy right here, okay? Poems. Yes, family poems. This is the first piece of the puzzle, okay? If you have kids, it's typically important and traditional to maintain the first character of their name between siblings. Obviously, this won't apply if they have a character with one name like Yao Ming, but take me as an example, right? My name is Ho Ga Wing. My sister's name is Ho Ga Wei. My father's name is Ho Yao Gong, and all his brothers are names that start with Ho Yao. Family poems create bonds between siblings and family, which helps maintain lineage and order in naming across generations. This is actually based on a historical tradition called 字辈 or 记辈, and it's meant to kind of establish like the relationship of the family through generations. It follows a whole like complex poem thing that is way beyond the scope of the video, but the tradition isn't that common anymore. It actually goes back like many years and follows like a whole complex poem thing about how to pick the middle character. But that tradition isn't that common anymore. But the only thing we kept from that era is keeping the tradition of keeping the same middle character in names with two characters. And that's how I know if Jackson has any siblings, they're probably Wang Jia something, right? Just like how me and my sister are Ho Ga, okay? But anyway, now we're on to the last piece of the puzzle, and basically the last bit before we name this buddy, okay? The last piece of puzzle to the good Chinese name is the hardest one, because a mediocre parent just picks some random word from that list earlier that sounds good. And it's much easier to pick words that are common in Chinese names, but it wouldn't be special if everyone did that, right? Take a look at the Chinese actor Bai Jingting. His name's actually inspired by the poem 独坐敬亭山, which means sitting alone at Jingming Mountain. This poem expresses an appreciation for nature, and the meaning behind the poem makes his name much more beautiful. So it's like it's deeper than just random characters. Here's another example. Liu Mingcun. This name is inspired by the poem 游山西村. And there's a famous saying in the poem, 柳暗花明又一村, which means willows shade, flowers bloom, another village appears. It delivers a message that there's always hope even when facing difficulties, and this name, Liu Mingcun, carries that message and expresses hope in a very graceful way. And so finding inspiration in poetry is like the ultimate tip for a top tier Chinese name. If you do that, you're like an A-tier parent, because in Chinese culture, names carry so much meaning. It actually determines like apparently like the freaking fate of your kid, right? Because meaning is the most important, okay? So it's not about picking random words, it's about understanding the poem and putting words that actually have meaning together to form like an amazing Chinese name, okay? So now, your mother said to make sure you keep the date and time of the baby being born. Well, that's because this stuff is a complete pain in the butt, okay? And so what I'm probably gonna do with this baby is go to a fortune teller who can help calculate which name would suit my child the best for their life. Okay, this is something a lot of Chinese families do. Now, what the fortune teller will do is tell you which of the 5 elements your child is lacking, kind of like Avatar, like wood, fire, water, metal, earth, or whatever. And then they give you a character to compensate for that lack. So if the fortune teller thinks your kid's missing some water, you'll get a water-based character with a good trait. So you tell the fortune teller, I want my kid to be great. They see your kid lacks water, and bam, you get Hao as one of the characters for your kid's name, okay? Which means like great, vast, but most importantly, it carries the water element in that character to compensate for your child's lack of water. Now, it might sound mumbo jumbo, but I mean, it's your kid's name, right? Like make it meaningful, right? They're gonna hold his name the rest of their life. But if you wanna go the DIY route, I mean, there's so many famous Chinese poets in history like Lei Ba or Li Bai, and if you don't want to do that, then just pick from the list I shared earlier, make it easy, whatever, the hot English name, right? Anyway, that's it for today's video. Hope you learned something on how to pick a good name for your child. I'm going to be disposing of this child. But anyway, click here if you're a Cantonese speaker who wants to learn Mandarin, and click here for a video that YouTube thinks you'll love. 周爱 Say goodbye.